Welcome, fellow wizards, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Today we're talking with Dan Morris about creating positivity in indie games. In our live podcast, we give listeners the chance to hear stories of breaking into the industry from industry veterans, as well as give them a chance to ask questions at the end of each episode. Dan is joining us from Houston, Texas. He's the frontman and business mogul for Fearzine Magazine. Dan, what are you having for lunch today?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. As far as lunch goes, I typically eat a late breakfast, which I just had right before getting on the call here. Usually just some like eggs and toast, maybe a little bit of greens on the side, something light and healthy.
Tasty.
But otherwise, I just have some water.
Yep, that's my follow-up. I snacked before this, and I got my tea.
Yeah, so, I had enough coffee already to kill a horse, so I'm good.
Yep. You know, you can just feel the palpitations as you try to come up with what to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you are a games journalist.
Yeah. I mean, in so much that I've kind of forced my way into the industry, if that's the way to put it, or like I like to say, the fake it till you make it kind of thing, because
right.
I now, after writing about games for several years on internet, various websites and things, I now have my own magazine that I run and do everything basically for.
Right, that's really cool. So that's actually very interesting. You say you forced it in. What we like to do here is have everybody introduce themselves and how they got to where they are. So talk about your journey into the games industry and your place in it. Like, where did you start and how'd you get here?
Well, if we want to go way back when, originally when I got out of high school, I went to a community college for game design because I loved games and I thought this is what I want to do. I want to make games. And I signed up for college courses and I did this thing where I literally enrolled in every single class that the college had listed in, like, these are classes you need to take for the first semester, which ended up being like 18 credit hours. I got very overwhelmed. I did not know that I didn't have to sign up for so many classes at once. So eventually I ended up withdrawing from that program because I couldn't handle doing like basically 12 to 15 hour days every day of the week. Like I would start at 6 a.m. and get out at 8 p.m. and I'd be driving back and forth to school every day. And it was a little overwhelming. So I eventually backed out.
Yeah, I did 2 classes at a time when I went back to school.
Yeah, I later went back to school and did it a lot better than that. But the first time was very misinformed on the way to go about these things. But I did take several design classes. I took some 3D animation courses. I did a lot of drawing classes because that was another thing I liked to do, was drawing. And if nothing else, I learned through that I like talking about games more than I like making games. And for a long time, I didn't know what to do about that or what I wanted to do. And eventually I went into the military to get a GI Bill to pay for school. So I did the Navy. I was in the U.S. Navy for 4 years. I got my GI Bill. And then afterwards, I thought, okay, do I want to go back into game design? I'm like, well, I don't really know what to do at this point. So what I ended up doing was the smart choice of, I got a real degree in psychology, thinking that, I like psychology. I like thinking about how people think and how they operate. And I had this interest in working with kids and like older adults or younger adults when they're in college and things. But afterwards, I got my degree in psychology. I was living in New York at the time, and everything in upstate New York is all mental health. And I was having a really hard time finding a career path or journey there that allowed me to do things that I wanted to do. And it was a very, very difficult, struggling time for me, especially when everything seemed really depressing. But that also got me to this point in my life where I started thinking, like, what am I passionate about? What do I want to do with my life? And I was listening to a lot of gaming podcasts at the time. And I thought, I want to be these people. I want to be in the room with these guys talking about games, sharing about our love, our passion, our joy, playing video games. And that led me to start a little blog site. And I started looking into podcasting and how to do podcasting. as I was posting my little blog that I think it still exists out there in the ether, but there's nothing worth looking at there now. I eventually got into this community called Retro Replay, which is a YouTube channel that was a show with Nolan North and Troy Baker, for anyone who's familiar with it. And it was through that community that I made a lot of good friends. I made a lot of cool connections. And I met my friend Pagan, where her and I decided we wanted to start a podcast. And we started making a weekly podcast about the show. We were doing a podcast about the show that we watched and just discussing like what they did and like the games they played. And we were meeting people in the community. So that was a big part of our show, was meeting other community members. And we did that for a while. And then she moved on to do other projects. And I restarted that show essentially as a new show for gaming called Screen Smash. And I've been doing that show for the Retro Replays website called Couch Soup for the last 2-ish years, year and a half or so. And it was also around this time that I started getting more involved with other avenues of writing. And I got introduced to write for Reload Magazine. Reload Magazine is a boomer shooter FPS focused magazine that I met through some really cool people. There's a lot of great folks that were a part of that community and working on that project. And that was the first time I've ever done anything that I wrote in print. And it was like, oh my God, this feels so cool to see my work in print rather than on a website. Because not to say anything or detriment to anyone who writes for websites or on the internet, literally anyone can do it. Everyone does do it every day, through social media and Twitter or X, any one of those platforms. But seeing your work in print, it felt special. And that led me to really thinking about how physical media plays such an important part of our experiences and our way that we consume content. And then Fearzine, as it is, was actually started by one of the original members of Reload. I'm not the original creator, so I'm going to give him credit. I don't want to say his name because I'm not sure if he's really comfortable with me publicly speaking about it, but the original creator started Fearzine as a spin-off from Reload. And as soon as he asked me about being a part of it, I was like, absolutely, because horror games are my jam. Horror games are my passion. I love all games, but horror games are one of my go-tos and my primary games. As you can see, I have a little like Resident Evil shrine behind me, which includes a signed piece of art from Nick Apostolidis, who plays Leon in the new Resident Evil games. And that was where I was like, yeah, this feels like the thing I should be doing. And then after that, the original creator, after we shipped the first issue, decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And he asked if somebody would want to take it over, and he approached me. And I was like, oh, man, do I have the ability to do this? I've never made a magazine before. I've never run a project like this. I've only ever written for them. And then after like relaying some of this with my best friend and now partner, Maria Kinnan, she was like, that you should do this. Like, this is just, it has your name written all over it. You love horror games. She's like, if you do this, you'll crush it. Like, she's like, I know you'll be able to do it. And I was like, all right, that's all I needed to hear. So I effectively took over control of Fearzine in June of this past year. It's now almost December, and we've basically tripled everything for the magazine since then. And it's just been this incredibly, incredibly heartwarming and humbling experience, because I'm working closely with developers. I'm trying to create this environment of positivity and support for game developers and fans. And it's something I realized I've been trying to do that for a long time, but I just never got any real progress, if that makes sense. Because I remember being a part of my podcast that I was doing, Screen Smash. One of my original pitch notions of that podcast was positivity and diversity. And even the producer was like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I want to promote people. I want to be positive. I want to have a positive air. I want to support people of all origins and backgrounds and makes and models and whatever you want to call it. I want to support anyone and everyone, and I want to do it in a positive way. I want to get away from the toxic, just negative blah kind of experiences that people are used to on the internet these days, because it doesn't make sense to me why people typically do that over being positive. So yeah, I mean, here we are now. Like we're getting incredibly tremendous support. We've managed to just destroy our expectations and our goals with what we were trying to do with the next issue, which now we're in full production of issue 2, which is now the first magazine that I have created from the ground up. I did everything, basically getting it established, getting it set up. I have a team that's helping me 100%. I'm not going to take full claim, but this is the magazine that I have created, and we're now printing. It's going to be getting shipped out to our fans and our supporters and our backers, and we have constant interest in wanting to work with us and like people connecting with what it is we're doing. And this is where it's like, okay, I want to start doing more to help even more connect with people. And to the point of now I'm looking at launching a podcast that is indie game developer focused, where I want to sit down with indie game developers and just have one-on-ones with them and talk about their journeys and their experiences, much the same with like what we're doing right here, right now. So I'm not an indie game developer, at least not so much, but it's a very similar experience, which is an interesting thing. When I sit down with developers, they start talking about the challenges they face. They talk about some of the struggles they go through and the little intricacies of their systems and how they do their workflows. And I'm like, it's actually very similar to what we're doing and how we are doing it, because we are an independent game magazine. We are a very small team. It's basically myself and Maria are like the core. We call ourselves the Army of Two, because we're the ones doing all the layouts. We're the ones doing the vast majority of the editing and the partnerships and setting everything up. So yeah, there's a very long-winded answer to my origin story.
No, that's fascinating. Like that brings up so many questions about like what you're doing and how you're doing it, because I know that one of the number one things that indies struggle with is getting visibility on their games. And it seems like there is in some level a barrier to entry to getting noticed at all. So having somebody who actively is seeking to highlight indie games and developers who don't have massive budgets or pre-existing renown, to be able to facilitate their success in pursuit of your own is something that I think is pretty integral to how indie games are going to succeed going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we see a lot of. And I had a meeting with another indie developer just the other day, and he was talking about some potential collaboration opportunities and things that we discussed about ways to help promote each other. And I always find myself getting into one of those thank you, no thank you, no thank you, no thank you kind of moments. And I jokingly was like, well, that's just it. Me supporting your business supports my business. So it's a constant mutual relationship of benefit and growth.
Yeah, that so I do have a question. You said that you're going to be shipping your magazine out to other people who have backed you. So when it comes to the audience, who is actually reading this magazine? How are you cultivating this audience? How are you reaching out to them?
A lot of work has been done through our social medias as of late. We have a bit of a returning audience from the first magazine, which was kind of like a bit of a rollover audience from the Reload community. And then now it's just we've been doing a lot to connect with developers. The developers have actually been kind of our biggest supporters. So it's a matter of reaching out to developers, letting them know that we have this magazine and that we are trying to do our best to support them in any way we can. Much like with everything we're doing right now, everything that we're doing with the magazine and any other future projects that we're talking about and working on, it's all in the vein of trying to help push them and support them and get eyes in front of their projects and their games. And if I were to look at our backer list right now for the Kickstarter, it's probably at least half of them are developers themselves, because just like me, they're really excited to see their game in a magazine. They're really excited to see their game in print, because let's face it, most indie games don't make it into print media, especially now when print media is kind of on the decline, which is a big part of our whole, like, we don't want print media to die. We don't want it to go away. And there's a certain nostalgic factor to having a physical, tangible thing in your hand, let alone you can't delete a magazine from a server if you actually hold it in your hand. It's always there. You can always hold it. You can always look at it. And I think that speaks volumes to many people. So again, our audience is still really small right now, but we've seen a lot of growth since we've taken over the project. And we've gone from, a few hundred followers on X, Twitter, to now we're over 1,500 followers on X. I created a Blue Sky account a month ago, and we have over 400 followers on there now. We're constantly trying to reach out and contact game developers. We support everyone. That's been a big thing for us. We are a horror game magazine, but we support everyone. If we see a game developer online posting about their game, or if they're talking about, oh man, I'm having a hard time with this right now, I'm struggling, this has been tough, we'll go in there and be like, your game looks great, keep at it, like, don't give up. And people, every time we get developers just like, oh my God, thank you so much just for your kind words. And this goes into our core topic of positivity here. That's something that's really clicked for us. It's clicked so well for us that our top tier Kickstarter backer tier was called Horrifically Wholesome, because that's what we're calling our community, is horrifically wholesome. They're all horror game fans, and we all talk about horror games, but everybody is super supportive and everyone is super nice. And there's just something so humbling and heartwarming to the way that this community has responded to us and what we're doing, that it's just, the more it happens, the more like, yes, we're leaning into this. We're going to push it as hard as we can to be supportive, to be engaging with everyone. I've even had developers who, like, we say, hey, your game looks cool. And they're like, oh, but it's not a horror game. And I'm like, so? I don't care. Like, it looks cool. I'm here for it.
Yeah. So, like, when you say you're being positive and you're helping, like, do you have explicit examples of like what you are doing to be positive and supportive? Like, when you put them in the magazine, how are you manifesting that support for the developers?
First of all, we are very much under this rule of thumb that if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all. So we have a prerogative that we won't say anything overtly negative about a game in our magazine. Like, I don't even want to say worst case scenario, because I don't think it's a worst case scenario, but we offer as much constructive criticism or feedback as possible. I try to say constructive feedback more than criticism, because it's a little bit more positive sounding. And if a game isn't in a good state, or it needs some work, or we're just not feeling it, we're not going to write about it. We're not going to print about it. And I have examples of that too. I have a game that I was given a code for to do a review for, and after spending a few hours with it, I was like, I don't feel good about this game. I'm like, I'm going to say more bad than good if I do write about it. So I reached out to the developer and I was like, hey, if you can fix some things, or if you can make some tweaks about this game, I'll be happy to write something good about it. But we don't want to bash anything. And this goes back into how we're working directly with developers and trying to give them feedback, or even doing play testing. There's been enough times too where even when I previewed a game, or I'm talking to developers on socials, and they're like, oh, did it run okay? Was there any glitches? Did you have any problems with it? And I'm like, no, it's like, it's fine. Or I understand it's in an early build, it's in alpha or beta, or it's not a full version of the game yet. And there's been a couple of developers that I give them feedback, and I'll say, like, this looks a little funky, or this didn't quite work right. And they get super happy and support. Like, they're so thankful that I'm even just giving them like positive feedback on something, even if it's something broken, and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm like, no, it's fine. I'm like, I'm not going to turn around and run to the internet and start being like, this game's trash because of this thing that happened in an early build.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's not helpful to provide scathing criticism. But do you think there is errors in the game development industry, that sometimes there are going to be issues with toxic positivity, where you try to be so positive to the point that you never offer somebody the criticism that they actually need? Do you think there
Mm.
would be room for a segment in your periodical about like here is a breakdown of a game in its current state, and let's have an intelligent discussion about what's working and what's not, and what can potentially be done to fix it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I would want to do with the developer. Like I would do it with them in mind or with them as part of that discussion or at least run it by them in advance because I wouldn't want to do anything that they didn't know about and then have it maybe blindside them even if it was the overall discussion of, hey, this might not be working great, but let's break down why. But
Yeah.
I love that idea though, and that's absolutely something that we can look at. And even we've had some developers talk about, they'd like to see that kind of stuff in the magazine. That would be a perfect segment, honestly.
Yeah, because I think when you're creating a periodical for games journalism, one of the number one things you have to focus on is who is the audience that you are writing to. Like you can be
Mm.
writing about people, but your allegiance should be to the person who holds your magazine and is actually flipping through it. Are you giving them the experience that they're seeking out of it? And I definitely think that that's a what are you doing to like identify specifically who you're trying to write to, and how are you tailoring the information to them? Like, what's your thought process in getting through to that audience that's going to be like your ravenous, we are here for this magazine?
I kind of figure for the most part that our core audience are the people who are passionate about horror games, passionate about indie games, and I can't tell you how often that I will say the name of a game and people go, "I've never heard of that before." And it's like, well, that's the whole idea. We're trying to create a simple, easy way for somebody to see things they've not heard of before. And if nothing else, just get it in front of their eyes in a way that they can see it quickly, read some initial impressions or thoughts on that game, and at least maybe go look at the game on Steam or something. Because we're going to include QR codes for every game on our pages too, so that people can easily just click and scan and go right to a Steam page if they need to. But when I think about who our readers is, I kind of think of myself as a fan and what I like to consume and how I like to consume it, and then I relate that with our team. And we're always trying to think of, what's the best way to entertain the reader as well as serve our core, you know, audience in the game development side of things, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do is provide a service for game developers, especially since so many of them struggle with marketing or PR or they don't have a budget for that necessarily. And all we want to do is, hey, we'll try to give you a couple of words on a page and some pictures, and it at least gets your game in front of some people in some way or form. And it doesn't cost them anything other than maybe a game code, if that.
Yeah, and those aren't very expensive at all. Yeah, so like
Mm.
when it comes to so this is definitely making me think of like, oh, where could these magazines show up where they would be really well
Mm.
received? And I think about things like I'm on the board for my local IGDA chapter, and I could see having a stack of these to bring to one of those IGDA meetings and just like setting it on the table and saying, hey guys, check out this cool game periodical that's coming out. It's independent, and you can potentially reach out to them. Something like that could work, getting them like slipped into libraries around the country where, because
Yeah.
if you think about it, what you're creating is pretty timeless. And that if there's a QR code to a Steam link, then, somebody could pick up the magazine 4 years from now and
Hmm.
scan it. And that game is still going to be available on Steam.
Oh,
So
precisely.
yeah,
Hmm.
to
And
move
that's
people
something
to
we would
stumble.
love to see if we can ever get to that point, if we can get that volume. And this is a big thing for us now is we see the need, we see the passion. Now it's just a matter of getting the support because we are independent. Just like an independent creator, we have a very, very tight, like shoestring budget. We pushed our Kickstarter goal a little bit more to try to do a little bit more. We try to offer more, and I would love to get our magazines in stores or in various places. And we've already talked to a few people about that idea, and like we've had a few folks mention like, oh, I have a comic book store or a tattoo shop, would I be able to sell this magazine in my shop? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I could easily try to like do like a bulk order and send it to you, and then you guys sell it, for whatever is fair for you to make a profit off of it.
Yeah, games and hobby shops would be a good place to to post those up.
There's a local comic book store here that I've actually talked to about it, and they gave me the email address for like their head of the company, but I haven't had a chance to reach out to them yet to see if they'd be willing to let me stock the magazines there.
Yeah, as an independent, you're probably going to have to do a lot of grassroots marketing for your own effort. And, this goes back to thinking about the IGDAs, because one thing that all of the IGDA members tend to know about is the local game and hobby shops that exist in their areas. So if you can somehow, through members of those kinds of organizations, reach out and just be like, listen, there may be a broader audience that are attached to these kinds of shops that are all over the states, that this one specific channel might be a good way to reach people who know about them.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's something I'm constantly trying to figure out and get into, and it's going to take a lot of legwork on my part to also like reach out to some of these places, and hopefully I will have some extra magazines and I can walk into a shop and show it to people and be like, how does this look to you? Does this look something you could keep in the store and maybe try to sell and see how it goes, kind of thing?
Yeah. So, as an independent journalist, I do want to pick your brain on the thought about independent games journalism versus mainstream game journalism. Anybody who's been paying attention to the internet knows that right now there's a big credibility issue when it comes to mainstream game journalism. The IGN umbrella, a very high-profile situation recently has been Dragon Age Veilguard, where that there was a lot of noise there, surrounding all kinds of topics, but there were some valid criticisms put in there, about, how the game was being built in relation to the original Dragon Age audience. And it seems like at a certain level of games media, there is a element of access journalism where people are starting to say, listen, if we listen to these outlets, all we're doing is getting regurgitated stuff that, they're being told. Like, this is not necessarily games journalism. This is somebody's intention to color my opinion rather than providing me quality information. So because of that, there is a credibility issue, and people are turning to more independent games journalist sources. So can you talk about the opportunities that you're seeing in that, or even if you want to talk about the mainstream thing, if you have thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. And that's definitely something that we think about and look at because of, like Game Informer closing and Play Magazine closing, and then the whole IGN thing, because like I followed IGN for years and I still look at their work and I still think about what they're putting out. And one of the things that I've had to struggle with, and this goes as long as I've been writing about games, as long as I've been covering and talking about games, is the process and mentality of following what somebody else says in any regard, because any review, good or bad, is informing you as a consumer in some form or fashion. If you read a review that aligns with your perspective, you're going to be like, cool, great, awesome. But if you read a review that goes against your perspective, you're going to be like, this review is garbage. But then that review might still give somebody else good perspective, whether or not it works for you or not. And I've made decisions to buy games that get overall bad reviews because I read one review that said, hey, this game lets you do this. And I went, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. So the concept of credibility is definitely something that's always on our minds. And being independent, being small people, small groups, that a lot of us aren't professional writers. A lot of us don't have backgrounds or degrees in, journalism or writing. And myself and my team are working to help these people become better writers and find their voice and think about how to write from their heart, put themselves in their writing. And like myself, when I write, I typically like to write with personal experience in mind, or I like to be funny and witty. I like to try to make the reader laugh. I think that's the best thing anyone can do when it comes to journalism, is to try to relate with the reader and make them understand that this is a person trying to tell you their opinion. Regardless of anything, this is still an opinion. And to whether or not you agree with that opinion is a whole subjective thing in itself. But going into the AAA, heavily owned and corporate side of publications, that's where things get muddy for sure. And it's hard to know who's credible, who's writing something that they should be writing or writing something that they've been told. And I can admit that even in recent years, there's been times where I read something from an author at one of the bigger companies that I've been following for years, and suddenly they put out a piece that I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't sound like something they would say. This is confusing. So yeah, it's hard. It gets easy to question, whether or not these people are still legitimate or if they're being paid off or, whatever type of label you want to put on this. And that's where we're hoping, as an independent magazine, as an independent source, we're always trying to give people the most grounded POV from fans. It's obviously you can go on the internet and read fan reviews all day, but some fan reviews are also really hard to read or they don't make a lot of sense, or people will have stuff that, I mean, I even read it in some of my own writers' stuff. They'll put really personal elements into the article that it's like, okay, that's fine, but like you're going a little too deep into that. You're going a little too hard into it. If you're going to mention that, like, keep it a quick, thin kind of thing to like make some sort of relatable concept, but then move on to, like, we are still trying to make people understand what it is about the game that you enjoyed, or what you like about it, or what you're excited about it, what you think the game has going on. It's a tricky thing, like, especially because we don't want to be that. We don't want people to think that, we're talking out our butts, and we want people to believe what we're telling them. And I get into heated conversations about this kind of stuff all the time with people. Like, recently, I talked to a guy I work with at my day job about reviews and the credibility of reviews. And we were talking about the concept of saying to a person, oh yeah, I've heard this game is good, or I've heard this game is bad. And then this guy I was working with mentioned, like, oh, I've heard that the general consensus is this game is bad. And I'm like, well, where'd you get that information from? Who told you that the general consensus is bad? Are you going by Metacritic? Are you going by IGN? And ultimately it came down to him having listened to like one YouTube influencer. And I'm like, so one person told you that most people don't like this game. So you believe now that most people don't like this game.
So I think what this boils down to is the meta of what people are turning to for their game recommendations is they find a limited set of trusted voices, and they need to understand, or it's imperative to get that understanding to the person that you have a good and solid way of analyzing games, and when you make a recommendation, it comes from a very authentic place, because there is that sense that now if you get a high view on IGN or high review on IGN, that's not because the reviewer actually thought it was good. It's because that review was a part of their marketing budget. And so once you get to that point, the review is basically meaningless. So and the more that sentiment builds up. So I think that's probably where that comes to building trust with your audience, and being received as like, yes, I am an authentic voice that you have come to trust over time, and therefore when I make a recommendation, it matters. Just like your friend who, he listened to that one YouTuber, that YouTuber has earned his trust. And that through whatever means he did so, he earned that guy's trust.
Yeah, and that's all in fairness too, and like it makes perfect sense to you have to try to establish yourself as an authority somehow, but it's just that process of how do you do that, and like trying to make people see and understand. I try to look at things as critically as possible, but everyone has their own viewpoints. And my other thing is I play everything. I play all games, all genres. I don't like all of them, but I try to, I dip my toe here and there. And I'm more critical on the things I like the most. And I'm also critical on the quality, as far as not the quality in to say that like, oh, how visually it looks or how fancy it is, but the quality of the experience. And that's where sometimes I think things get easily lost, where some people will get like they get swept up in graphics. And it's like, well, graphics don't make a game. And but not everybody believes that. Some people are perfectly fine with a game that looks good, but everything else can be kind of meh. So I've been trying for a long time to establish myself in some level of authority to say that I have a pretty good understanding of what are good and fun games versus games that aren't good and fun. But I also am quick to admit if like that game doesn't do it for me, but I understand why other people like it. I understand why it's popular, even though it doesn't work for me. And I would like to think that that helps add to my own personal credibility, that I can admit when and why I don't like something. But it's all subjective, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think there's layers to it too. Like you're saying, some things matter more than others, and this really depends on the game. That I'm going to go back to Dragon Age for why it has such different kinds of viewpoints, because some people are judging the game based on what it is in a silo, and other people are judging the game based on what it is as a step in a franchise, because people come in with different expectations. If you were a long-term Dragon Age fan, and like what you are expecting out of Veilguard is going to be different from somebody who just picks it up for the very first time. Like
absolutely.
they've made changes to the game that a lot of people have a lot to say about. Okay,
I mean,
so
I can speak directly on Dragon Age if you want to.
I would love to hear that, but we are getting limited on time right now, and I want to get us to the community questions. Make sure we knock some of those out.
Sounds good.
Sure. So our first question is going to be from Spark. Spark is a beginner to game developer, or beginner to game dev, and he's completed his 12th year in India. He wants to start game development, and he wants to know, like, for programming, what should he do?
For programming and in game development, I mean,
Yes.
that's programming questions wise. As I'm not a game developer myself, that's a little out of my scope.
Okay. That's that's fair. I'll offer an answer to that. I recommend finding programming courses in the engine you want to work in. Some programs offer the like there's a gamedev.tv course that's really good to get started with. They have a complete Unity developer course that teaches you how to program in C# within the context of Unity. So something like that is good. Okay, we have another question here from Vishnu Hota. He has a question regarding, should I first work as a game dev intern or solely focus on making games by myself until I graduate?
I mean, that's definitely an interesting idea because from my experience talking to indie game developers, a lot of them just kind of just start doing it on their own from what I've been told. And what I understand, a lot of the developers I'm talking to are solo devs. And we did just recently do it like a spotlight on this developer. He runs Enigma Studio. He basically just said that in 2020, he just quit his day job and went like, I'm just going to make games. And that he put all of his time and energy into it. But on the flip side, there's other smaller teams and studios, and I guess it depends on where you're trying to go with your career, whether you're trying to get into like the greater AAA kind of space, or if you're more focused on the indie game side of things.
All right. Yeah, I definitely agree. Number one thing you can do, and this is the common recommendation from everyone here in our community, is just make games. Just keep making games and plugging away at opportunities. And if you don't get the internship right away, then keep making games, and then that will put you in a better position when you do get an internship.
I've always heard from a lot of developers too to just make something quick and small to begin with, and then build upon it with each iteration.
Excellent. All right, so we have another question from Roberto. Roberto, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. So basically, I was asking, as a game developer, should I like actively contact like game journalists like you and IGN and stuff? Like, should I contact them? Like, it could be like on social media, like for like interviews and game criticisms. Like basically asking them like for an interview, or them to critique my game, or should I wait until I until I release my game and then just like wait for them to or like release like a devlog or something like that, like release like updates about my game and just wait for them to contact me for interviews and criticisms.
I would say for me, from personal experience, I always appreciate and accept people reaching out to me and asking me to look at their projects. If you ask me for feedback, if you ask me for play testing, if you ask me for an interview, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to look into your project. I will look into your game. I will try your game. I will give you feedback. If you don't reach out to me, I might not see it. It might not make it in front of my radar. And that depends, again, because we're a smaller team. Maybe a bigger team has more people able to do that. Maybe there's other teams that have the ability to be canvassing for those kinds of things. But I can tell you, as far as my personal professional experience, because of how embedded I get in some tasks and projects I'm working on, it can be easy to miss that stuff. But I get an email, and this happens for me regularly, people emailing like, hey, we see what you guys are doing. Would you mind looking at my game? Would you preview it? Do you want codes? And I'll look at it and be like, oh, yeah, this looks cool. Absolutely. Send us some codes over. We'll do a preview or we'll give you some playtesting feedback, Or like right now, I'm working on setting up a podcast for game developers. Like, I'll get you scheduled on a podcast.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on how easy you are to find. And there can be the element of, if you want them to reach out to you, you need to have your own marketing campaign going on such that, because marketing is just getting visibility, awareness, and credibility about your project. And if you make him aware and you appear credible enough, he'll reach out to you. But then if you send him an email, then suddenly it's not just everything on the internet that might catch his attention. It's, hey, this is this guy who has an email inbox, and I'm one of 20 lines there, right? Versus my page versus all the internet. I think also independent people versus something like IGN. IGN's inbox is going to be a lot more lines. So
yeah,
that's a great question, Roberto.
Yeah, I appreciate that question.
All right, thank you.
I guess, Dan, as a follow-up on that, if somebody wanted you to review their game, what's the best way for them to reach out to you to say, hey, check out my project?
We are fully accepting any messages via social media, DMs. Our DMs are open on most social media platforms. And we have an email address at contact@fearzinemagazine.com, plus a submission form directly on our website at fearzinemagazine.com. You can go right to our website, fill in the box, and those emails come directly to me, and I can take a look at anything. This applies to developers and writers. Like, we've been having writers reach out to us too and say, I would love to write for you guys.
Excellent. So that's contact@fearzinemagazine.com.
Correct.
What's your website again?
Fearzinemagazine.com.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Our next question is going to be from Pat G. Pat, do you want to come up on stage, or would you like me to ask the question for you? All right, I'm going to ask it on his behalf because he may be busy. Pat asks, he has a gaming journal of games that he plays. What do you recommend that he journals if he wants to do something like you're doing, but from the science hat?
If I'm trying to understand, like an actual journal, like keeping a journal of his games from a science hat. Like, I'm reading the question. I'm trying to understand what it is he's asking exactly.
Pat, do you want us to bring you on for clarification? All right, I'm going to invite him up to speak.
Okay.
Yes, sorry,
Hey,
that was a little unclear.
No problem.
I just wanted to make sure. A pleasure meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So my question is, I'm also changing careers from engineering to more of a game dev stuff. Been doing game dev for a while as well. I've been journaling for over 15 years just on video games. It sounds kind of funny, but I love to do it. I love to kind of examine the physics and stuff behind it, kind of would this really happen in real life kind of situation. Um, I guess my question is more on how you kind of look at it from the aspect of somebody else is going to be reading this, right? Changing from just me holding it for myself and instead being able to share that with somebody else. Does that make sense?
It sounds like what we talked about a little while ago about like the experience for the reader.
Yeah. Like, how did you determine what you wanted the reader to know? Because there's still inside thoughts, I'm sure, that you have that you're like, I'm gonna keep those to myself.
Oh, okay, I got you. I understand.
Yeah.
So it does relate to earlier we were
Sorry, I'm a
talking
jarhead,
about.
so
No, it's all good. I mean, I'm ex Navy.
oh,
Oh yeah, don't. It's fine. A lot of times when I look at how things are written, it's a matter of getting as much concise information on the page, but also trying to make the reader understand the experience and the emotions that you felt as a player, especially for us being horror focused. A lot of times we have had issues with writers who sometimes maybe get a little repetitive or redundant, or I've said this to some of my writers. I'm like, I feel like I'm reading a pitch for the game, and they're like, "Is that bad?" I'm like, it's not so much that it's bad as it doesn't help the reader to understand what the experience is playing the game. This sounds like you're trying to explain to people the concept, but not what it's like to actually play the game. And that's more the goal here, is to make people understand that an experience you had playing the game, or the demo or the preview or the alpha build. And like an example for this is I previewed Hollow Body, which is one of the bigger horror indie games right now. I previewed that game last September, and I was trying my hardest to make sure I explained to people in my write-up that I got really strong Silent Hill vibes. You know, it definitely has a really cool aesthetic. It felt good to play. I really enjoyed this about the game or that about the game. You know, or maybe there was a few shortcomings here that I hope the developer works on. Again, this is an early preview of the game long before it came out. So I was trying to offer as much constructive criticism and feedback about the game without sounding negative about it, but also try to make sure the reader understood, oh, this game is kind of like a Silent Hill, you know, and this game has this and it has that, and it allows you to feel this or feel that when you're playing the game. And that's something I'm always trying to tell my writers is make sure you're making the reader understand what it's like. Because if you don't, they're better off just going to the Steam page and trying to download the demo or go and buy the game and play it for themselves. Because to me as a reader, the minute I get the sense of what a game is like to play, that's what'll make me go, ooh, I want to play that game. Because now I have a sense of what it is and what it feels like to play that game. And I don't know if this is answering your question so much.
no, it is. It is. I think for me, like what you just said, I don't want to necessarily pitch somebody's game if I don't feel passionate or feel like the physics mechanics. For example, like flight simulators, right?
Mm.
Nowadays, flight simulators can be really, really realistic or very forgiving and not realistic at all. A 10-second reaction time, it can change the game from a digital twin to a fun, I'm gonna go fly a plane across the world in like 2 seconds kind of thing, you know? So I think for me, kind of straddling that engineer hat and game development hat, I'd like to bring that a little bit more into my writing and actually be able to share that because I think we're getting to that point where our physics engines, which are our game engines, are becoming so in tune with the world that people kind of need to know like one thing is not the same, but like they're coming pretty close. So I'd like to nod the hat at some people that are doing great jobs in video games.
I think
So
that makes for a perfect feature type of thing. Like if you were to ask me and pitch to me for the magazine, be like, "Hey, I want to talk about the physics engine in the new Silent Hill game," you know, and you break it down into the science. There's a level of acceptance there as long as you can keep it readable. You know, there's gonna be the people that see that and they go, "Ooh, that's really interesting," and then you're gonna have the other people like, "I don't give a crap about that," you know, and that's gonna be the case with just about anything. But to pick up where I think you're going with this, I think you have a good idea, and I think there are going to be those people and those readers out there that read about that or they hear about that and they get really interested in understanding the physics and the like science, the engineering that goes behind game design, the engines, the amount of work that goes into creating these digital worlds. And they get like they're so close to reality at this point, especially when we're at this level of graphics that we're getting that the diminishing returns on visuals. And like that's something too that you could go onto a whole nother avenue with.
Yeah, I know that Unity put out, I don't know if you've seen the YouTube video of like the Ghost trailer of like just the wind going through all the grass and stuff like that, and those little
Mm.
blades. Like people don't realize how much effort that actually took for that to happen.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's a huge nod, like people always want to see something better. I'm like, it's not that easy just to put a blade of grass there and make it move like that. So
No.
a lot of people I feel just don't understand what happens in the black box of things, and kind of try to explain a little bit more of that would be nice. So
That helps me hearken to the notion that I like to try to humanize game developers
yeah,
because I feel too many people see games and they don't think about the work that goes into making them, that behind the scenes. That was actually one of the notions behind my original podcast name of Screen Smash. It was this idea of looking behind the screen. You're trying to see what's happening behind the visuals, behind the graphics, because a lot of people are just like, "Oh, that's pretty. Make it better." And you're like, "Do you have any idea how much work it took to get it to look like that?"
yeah, I
Yeah.
100% feel that. Well, I'm not gonna stop you from answering other questions. Thank you. I will definitely link up with you sometime.
You're welcome, man.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, Pat.
Bye.
Yeah, so that definitely sounds like there would be a segment there that is like real life or fantasy. Like where on the spectrum does it fall? Is this a perfect simulation, or is this something that is just completely make believe for the purpose of entertainment only? It feels good, and you don't need to try to use it as a sim. That would be a really interesting breakdown. There would definitely be somebody who would want to look at the different facets that go into it, if for nothing else than the reverse engineering of that. And as a developer, if you wanted to think about what went into those kinds of sims, having someone who breaks it down would be fun.
Mm-hmm. I can see how that would add value to people who are like mutuals in that industry or that area of expertise, and to be like, "Oh, that's how they did it." Okay, I can think about that, or I can go back and see if I can do that myself.
Yeah, that breakdown would allow you to think and replicate it. All right, we are at 1 o'clock, which means this is the end of our episode. I want to thank you for asking or for answering all of the questions and for giving a wonderful talk about journalism and of the considerations and giving us your story about what you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank everybody in the audience for your wonderful questions. Before we leave, I want to ask two things of you. The first is I want you to plug anything you want to plug. And then the second is I want you to give homework to our audience. Just one thing to do that you think would be good for a group of aspiring game developers to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already kind of hit on it, but as far as the plugging aspect of things, it's all Fearzine right now. Fearzine Magazine. Check out our website. The website is very basic right now. It's just kind of mostly a landing page with some of issue 1's articles, which you can go there now. You can read some of the articles from issue 1. All of issue 1 is free. Issue 1 in its entirety is free to download and read from our website. And that helps us kind of like get the ground running. Issue 2 is going to be vastly different. It's been completely visually overhauled. Right now we're in production of that, and it's limited to the people who did back us on Kickstarter, but we are looking at ways of making it available after the fact. If nothing else, I'm going to try to make it available to purchase from our website digitally and possibly print on demand if we can find a good option for it. Other than that, like if you want to just keep in touch with us, you can follow us on social medias. You can follow us on X, on Blue Sky, Fearzine Magazine across the board. And you can keep an eye out for the podcast that we're looking at launching and maybe a YouTube. We're in the early workings of possibly a YouTube channel, but it's too soon to say for sure.
Excellent. And
Last
the homework for everyone.
Homework. Absolutely. This is the thing that I was certain about as soon as I thought when you guys had told me to ask for a homework assignment was I would like for anyone listening to this to go onto social media and just give another game developer some sort of positive message on their post or their account on their game. Do something that like makes somebody feel good about their work, makes them feel like they're doing something right, and just give somebody that little bit of hope, especially if they have had like a bad day or if they got a negative or toxic post, because I see it a lot where people are pouring their hearts and souls into a project only to get really toxic, awful responses on the internet. And you can't imagine how much it speaks to just have someone say, "You're doing great. Keep it up. You're doing good."
That is
So please.
Excellent homework. That's hugely beneficial. Feeling that sense that somebody appreciates the work that you're putting out into the world.
For an example,
Awesome.
if I can real quick, there's a horror game in development right now by a small team out in Spain. It's called Echoes of the Living. Check this game out. It looks really cool. For whatever reason, these poor developers are getting a lot of flack on the internet because it's taken them a long time to make the game, but they're making it really good. It looks amazing. And I've been talking with them, and like they're putting their hearts and souls in this game, and I keep telling them, don't listen to the haters. Your real audience is here. We're gonna wait. We have no problem waiting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan. This has been a wonderful episode. Everybody who's listening, go out and encourage another game developer. Maybe even load contact at fearzinemagazine.com with all of your game submissions. Inundate them. And everybody, thank you for coming to the podcast, and thank you, Dan.
Thank you. It's been lovely.
Yep. Have a good one.